And this tutorial, you will be able to understand what is class, how to define class in Python, how to instantiate objects of that class, what are attributes and methods in the class, and what is constructor and instance attributes and the init method in object-oriented programming in Python. A class is a blueprint that defines the variables and the methods common to all objects of a certain kind. For instance, we can think of a class as a sketch or prototype of a house. It contains all the details about the floors, doors, windows, etc. Based on those descriptions, we build the house, so the house is the object. As many houses can meet from a house's blueprint, we can create many objects from a class. So an object is called an instance of a class. And the process of creating this object is called instantiation. Why we need to define a class in Python? For example, let's say you want to track employees in Coca-Cola company. You need to store the basic information about each employee, such as their name, age, position, salary, and the year they started working. One way to do this is to represent each employee as a list, look like this. So there are a number of issues in this approach because let's assume the Coca-Cola company has over 10,000 employees. And to store each of the details of the employee in a list, you could have 10,000 variables, which stores each of the employees' profile. So this make larger code files more difficult to manage. If you reference profile at index 1 in the first list, for example, it prints the age of that employee. But when you refer the second list at the same index, it prints male engineer, which is the position of that employee. So in this case, the two lists have no equal number of elements, but they work at the same company. And in the second list, age is missing. So this is a challenge. So it is difficult to track each of the employee details using such kind of way. So the great way to make this type of code more manageable and more maintainable is to use classes. How to define classes in Python? You can use the class keyword and the name of the class. So a class is created by the keyword class. An object is created using the constructor of that class. So this object will then be called the instance of the class. So this is what creating objects of the class, my class. So this is a constructor. To instantiate the object of the class, we use the constructor of the class. A constructor is a special method that is used to initialize a newly created object and is called just after the memory is allocated for that object. It can be used to initialize the object to desired values or default values at the time of object creation. So this is called the process of creating objects for the class, my class, which is the instance of the class. When you are creating classes in Python, you can use capitalized words, which is naming convention. So for example, this is my class. The class has two consecutive words, and I used capitalized words to create a class. Okay, the other is attributes and methods in a class. Every class should have attributes and methods to store information about that object. So a class by itself is of no use unless there is some functionality associated with that class. Functionalities are defined by setting attributes of the class, which act as containers for data, and functions relate to those attributes that take an action of that object. So the functions which are set inside the class are called methods. Let's implement a class called rational. So this class has an attribute of frac, which stores the data of fraction numbers. Then I just instantiate the object of this class, and I can access the attributes defined inside the class using the object of the class and dot operator followed by the attribute name defined in that class. So to access and print out the values stored in this attribute, I can use the instance name dot the attribute which is defined inside the class, for example, frac. So the information is now printed out. Once we set an attribute in this class, we can able to create the object of the class as you're seeing here. And we can assign the class to a variable like this. This is called what? Object instantiation, which is the process of creating object for that class. So you will then be able to access the attributes that are present inside the class using the dot operator and call the name of that attribute defined inside that class. So far, so good. And once there are attributes that belong to the class, you can define functions that will access the class attributes. These functions are called methods. When you define methods, you need to always provide the first argument to the method with a self-keyword. For example, in this rational class, we can define the attributes of the class, numerator and denominator. Then, to access the attributes of this class, we can define the function which is called methods. The first argument of this method is the self keyword, and we can pass other arguments. So in this case, we can access the attributes of the class using the self keyword inside this function or method, and we can assign the arguments of the function into the attributes. And the function going to return the fraction of the numerator and denominator. Now we have finished defining the function or the methods of the class, and this class going to return the result of this fraction when you call that function. To access these methods of the class, we can use then we call the function fraction, and this function has 3 arguments, but the first argument is the instance of the object or the class, which is instance name. We don't need to pass any value for the first argument, self-keyword. When you are instantiating the object of the class, it automatically assigns that instance name to the self-keyword. And we pass the 2 arguments into this function. For example, 4 and 5. Then we print out the result of the function. Now we get 0.8 as a result of this function. So those are the attributes and methods of a class. So we can define many more methods to perform different actions. And we can also define different attributes of the class, because every class has the states and behaviors of that object of the class. So this self keyword represents the instance of the class. By using the self keywords, we can access the attributes and methods of the class in the Python object-oriented programming. This allows each object to have its own attributes and methods. Now, let me show you the instance attributes and the init method. We define how the class rational should work with a special hidden method is called init. So you can comment this attributes because we can define the attributes of the class in the init method, which is the render method, or we sometimes call constructor of the class. Okay, so it takes the self keyword in the first argument of the render method, and we can pass the attributes of the class through this constructor. Okay, so in this case, you can, for example, you don't need to define this. And here, where you are calling a constructor, you need to pass the arguments of the constructor, because we defined the constructor here with two arguments, numerator and denominator. So we need to pass values for this constructor arguments 4 and 5. In this case, the fraction will not need to assign any arguments. We can access the attributes of the class through the constructor. Okay, so that is similar with the previous one. All right, so this is what the init method, or the render method, that is one of the reserved methods in Python in object-oriented programming. It is also known as constructor of the class. So the init method can be used to just instantiate the object of the class. And when it is called, an object is created from the class, and access is required to initialize the attributes of that class, which is the self keyword. There is also another method, that is RPR. This method is basically used to tell Python how to print out the object. In this case, it will just print when you are printing the objects only. You see, when you are printing the object, it just prints the hidden method RPR, which tells how to print out the objects of that class. Those are the instance attributes and the init methods. Not only this, there are a lot of hidden methods in Python class. So you can work on object-oriented programming more and more in practice, and develop a big program that will solve a problem. For example, a company employee database, okay? Basically, object-oriented programming is very useful to just solve big problems. So I hope you enjoyed this video tutorials about class and object-oriented programming. And in the next class, we will see about inheritance. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, write comments.